Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest Southern California housing market update video. My name is Stephen Mead with Domicile real estate for people who love houses. And just as a reminder, our Southern California market videos are based on Los Angeles and Orange counties. We do run our own statistics for these markets. You might notice that I'm in a suit and tie, despite my propensity for wearing t-shirts and flannels. I do in fact own a suit and tie. This is the week of the California Association of Realtors business meeting. So even though they are on Zoom, we are still expected to dress in meeting attire. Anyhow, without further ado, I really want to get into the stats this week. And the reason why is because I think this is the first time in over a month that if you're a home buyer, I actually get to report some sort of surprisingly very mild good news and kind of some encouraging signs for things that I think indicate that things might be getting a little bit better if you're a home buyer out there. I don't know how long this trend will continue or how much better they'll get, but it's always nice to see the needle, kind of swinging in that direction. And if you're a seller, the market is still crazy hot, so don't worry. You will still have, you might have gone from 5 buyers writing offers on your house to 4 now instead. But without any other delay, let me get into the statistics for this week. Let me pull that up here. So our first statistic here is our total active listings, right? And this is, of course, February 9th, 2021. And if you remember last time, the thing we were talking about is, are we going to start to see more listings showing up? And if you look very closely here, hold on, it is an ever so slight increase, barely even noticeable, but it's definitely not a decrease, which is what we had been seeing. So, that's a good sign, right? So, keeping up with the good news, this is the one that I think I'm the most excited about, right? So, we had sort of towards the end of the year, if you were in our under $1 million category here, you saw new listings. Our 14-day new listings just took a dive to about New Year's, and then they rebounded and just kind of fizzled out. Well, this week we see a very, very slight, but definitely noticeable increase in the number of new listings hitting the market. Obviously, I would like to see that number a bit bigger. I think this is the reason why we're only seeing ever so slight moves to our active inventory. And the reason for that is because we're still largely an inventory constricted market. There's still just not enough houses. There is more than one buyer for every viable listing on the market. If you go down here to our 1 to 2 million, it's a much gentler effect, but still an effect nonetheless. And you see that those 14-day new listings are on the rise. This is what we call the supply of the market, right? Like, what is the supply of new homes? And it's really important to sort of watch this. But it's also equally as important to watch the other side, and that's our market demand. And this is our 14-day of new escrows. Now, you saw in our under 1 million, you saw a very similar path, right? Like, they took a dive towards the end of the year, then they rebounded. But here's something interesting. Demand didn't fall, but it's fairly flat. And I think one of the things that we might be seeing this year, and I hope this turns out to be true, is I hope what we're seeing is that sellers are just delayed versus buyers in 2021. And what I mean by that is, after the New Year's hangovers had faded, I think buyers were back in the market. I mean, immediately, right? Like, they didn't take any time. They just jumped right back in and started buying houses. I think the sellers, if we go back here, they came back, but then things just fizzled out. I think there was that group of people that maybe had been waiting over the holidays. They all put their house on the market and then nothing for a couple of weeks. But if you look here, there was no delay. There was no real just fall off. I mean, things rebounded, been kind of steadily going up, but now it's flat. And I think this is really a sign for buyers that, hey, things are slightly easier this week than they were last week for you out there in the market. Now, obviously, as I mentioned, slightly easier is kind of a relative term, right? It means that instead of 10 offers on every listing, maybe now there are 9 offers on every listing. If we're looking at our $1 to $2 million range, we see a very similar effect, right? Decline, rebound, and then really flat the last week. Just demand just staying steady. Now, if we reconcile the supply and demand, what do we notice has happened in the last week? Well, if we look here, we hit sort of a peak close to 100% absorption. We've actually dropped a little bit in our under $1 million category. Now, mind you, we are still over 80% for both of these. And in fact, we're pretty close. I think we're just below 90% on our under 1 million. This is still a very crazy market. It is just not quite as crazy as it was a week or maybe even 2 weeks ago. There's just a little bit more supply in the marketplace. And I think that that's really going to help out buyers if that trend continues. As always, it may not be much, but right now, if you know someone who's looking to buy in the marketplace, you know how tough it is. So any news, even if it's a small bit of good news, is still good news indeed. Now, if we look at our close prices, this is kind of an interesting graph, right? And remember, these are 30 to 45 days ago. So if you're looking at these numbers, you're not looking today. We're reporting them this week, but these are based on contracts that were negotiated. Now, as again, we have our market divided into three categories for closed prices. Our 25th percentile, which is our entry-level market here in blue, our median market, which is notated here in red, and our 75th percentile. And all of them are actually down slightly. Not a huge amount down, but down just a little bit. Now, of course, overall, what do we see? I mean, these prices are still up, right? Like prices haven't really declined by very much. They're basically at least steady with where they were, at the end of the year or around Christmas time, near there, right? And I do expect to see these change direction as some of the more recent sort of pricing data comes into play. But I think it's important to look at these and understand, if you're a buyer in the marketplace, it's not all bad news. Now, if you're a seller, what does this mean? I think if you're a seller, what this means is, yes, we have an incredibly brisk market. Do not overplay your hand. And what I mean by that is we may be approaching a point, probably not this week, but perhaps in the coming weeks, where you can't get away with doing anything that you want, right? I would tell you last week, if you're a seller, you could practically put your house up $100,000 over. People will still come look at it. You'll probably still sell your house. You might not get a full price offer, but you'll get people looking. You won't get crickets. We might reach a point where that kind of a mistake could cost you dearly in the amount of time it takes to sell your house and in the amount of money that you get. Now, this is another graph that we've been using to kind of take the temperature of the market. And what this is we look at all the listings that came on the market in the last 14 days, right? Like, so everything that came on the market in the last 14 days. And we say, well, how many of those houses are still available, right? How many are still active? And what we're seeing is kind of some slight increases in both our under 1 million and our $1 to $2 million categories. And part of the reason for that is that means inventory is actually rising in the past 7 days, even like in the most recent listings. That most recent data is showing new listings coming up in the market. And really, that's what we need. We need more listings. We need more sellers to say, it's time to sell my house. By the way, if you are one of those sellers who's been thinking about it, definitely give us a call. Or even if you just have questions, right? If you're kind of not sure how this might play into your overall strategy, that's really what we're here for. Now, finally, in terms of our kind of basic market stats, we have our list to close ratio, right? And, again, what's interesting is we saw this number take a dive for our 1 to 2 million, and I predicted it was going to rebound the next week. Well, guess what happens? It rebounded the next week. We can see that right here. And while these numbers look pretty far apart, understand this whole distance here is 1 percentage point. And this close to list ratio is we take a look back and we say, okay, of the homes that closed, how close were they to their list prices? In our we're almost at 100% here for 1 to 2 million, and we are at over 101% for our under $1 million price category. Incredibly strong numbers that indicate the market really is just kind of pushing in an upward trajectory long term. Now, this is our days on market for new contracts statistic. And if you look at this, right, look at where we were versus kind of around Christmas time-ish, right? In the month of December, we just saw this, both these categories, these days on market just eroded, right? And now we finally kind of reached a steady point here around, I think it's about 27 days on market. And for our 1 to 2 million, same thing. That number just kind of eroded. We had a hiccup around the holidays, but I mean, really, that number just, it's still heading down here a little bit. But 40 days on market for luxury listings, that's just, I mean, that's really just a minimal number. Finally, we have our affordability of the median priced home as we've indexed back to 2018. Looking at that news, right, you can see we've actually dipped back down below that 100% mark. And part of this is because of that slight softness in price. The other is that interest rates have thankfully kind of eased back down. I do think we're in a different ball game. For pretty much most of 2020, we were in this 90 to 95% range, and kind of look at this is sort of the new normal, right? But this is really fantastic when you think about it, right? If you're a buyer, it means that even today you are paying less in payment than you would have paid in July of 2018 for the median priced home. And we actually have reason to believe that the median priced home isn't just more expensive because of prices going up, but it's also more expensive because in general, people are trying to buy larger homes because of stay-at-home orders, because of work from home, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just going to take a couple minutes to talk about sort of what are your moves if you're a buyer. Well, if you're a buyer and you're waiting for just a little bit of a let up in the market, this is it. There are more houses. You'll have a little bit better selection. It will not be quite as competitive, still very competitive. If you're a seller, what you want to guard against is you don't want this trend to continue. You don't want a glut of inventory to sort of change those market dynamics. I think that's especially true if you are in a home that isn't picture perfect. And what I mean by that is, do you have a home that maybe borders a street? Do you have a home that maybe isn't remodeled? Any of these qualities, you will be disproportionately hurt by that in a market that is a little bit slower than someone who has a picture perfect house who will still get people fighting over the listing. And the reason for this is sort of that 80-20 rule, right? 20% of the listings, the top 20%, will get 80% of the attention. Now, in a market where there's just not enough inventory, everything gets tons of attention, right? And that doesn't really hurt you very much. But if there's a market that slows at all, and I'm not saying that it's going to, we have a very slight easing up this week, that means you will be hurt more by that than someone who has that picture perfect home. So just to recap, if you are trying to get into the market as a buyer, great news, things are better this week than they were last week. Rates are still low, et cetera, et cetera. Inventory is a little bit better. If you are a seller, hey, our absorption rates are still well over 80%. This is still a market that is very heavily tilted in your favor, but understand, the market ebbs and flows, and you have to bear that in mind. Anyhow, thank you so much for watching. We definitely love your questions, your comments. Do not forget to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell if you're watching on YouTube. And of course, if you have any real estate questions, we would be happy to answer them for you. And likewise, if you know of someone who you think could use a little bit more strategic thinking in their real estate, we'd love to help them as well. Definitely send them our way. And we will see you later on this week for our first time home buyer market update, which will come out on Friday.